You hear the bells before you see the city, bronze throats tolling across the hills of Italy, echoing in the valleys like the heartbeat of some great beast that refuses to die. Rome, the eternal city. Its marble bones still shine in the sun, but its soul, that's harder to find. Between the ruins of emperors and the crumbling arches of forgotten triumphs, the streets seethe with beggars, mercenaries, and courtesans, and at the very center of it all rises the Lateran palace, the house of the Pope, the man who calls himself the Vicar of Christ on earth. You step into its echoing halls, cold stone, gilded doors, frescoes of saints who stare down with painted eyes. The air should smell of incense and prayer. Instead, it reeks of spilled wine, sweat, and musk. Somewhere down the corridor, you hear laughter. Not the gentle laughter of children or the warm chuckle of a priest at supper, but the hoarse, raucous howls of men drunk beyond reason, of women shrieking in delight, of dice clattering across marble floors. You've walked into a palace, yes, but it feels like a brothel, and there, in the middle of it all, you see him. A young man lounging on silk cushions, golden chalice in hand, a smirk tugging at his lips. He is no shepherd of souls, no grey-bearded saint. He is barely 18 years old. His name is Octavianus, son of Rome's most powerful nobleman, Alberic II. But the world calls him by another name, Pope John XII. The church tells you a pope is chosen by God himself. But as you look at this boy in crimson robes, drunk and grinning, you can't help but wonder if Rome hasn't mistaken the devil for Christ's vicar. To understand John XII, you have to understand the world that birthed him. This is the 10th century, the age historians call the Saculum Obscurum, the Dark Century, or more bluntly, the Pornocracy. It was a time when Rome was less the holy city of God than a carcass picked over by vultures. Those vultures had names: Theophylactus, Theodora, Marozia. They weren't popes or priests, but nobles, a family that seized the eternal city after the collapse of Carolingian power. Marozia especially haunts these halls. A Roman noblewoman of stunning beauty and ruthless ambition, she manipulated lovers and husbands, cardinals and generals. Chroniclers, many of them enemies, called her the harlot who ruled Rome. They whispered that one pope, Sergius III, fathered her son. Whether that's true or slander hardly matters. What matters is that for nearly a century, this family treated the papacy like private property. They decided who sat on the papal throne, who wore the tiara, who lived and who died. By the time you walk these streets, Marozia is long dead, but her son Alberic II controls Rome with an iron fist. He styles himself Prince of the Romans, a title that echoes ancient Caesars, but is built on bribery and blood. Popes are pawns in his game. When one displeases him, Alberic has him beaten, imprisoned, sometimes quietly killed. Rome has grown used to the spectacle. Priests whisper their masses, terrified of crossing the ruling family. The people in the streets shrug and say, "Another pope will come tomorrow." And Alberic has plans for his own son. Octavianus grows up in the shadow of the Lateran, not as a pious novice, but as a spoiled noble, racing horses, hunting boar, drinking too much wine. He is handsome, so handsome that his admirers compare him to the heroes of pagan Rome. Dark hair falling across his forehead, quick hands at dice, quicker still with women. He is clever, charming, and dangerous. He has inherited not only his mother's beauty, but also her appetite for power. When Pope Agapetus II dies in 955, Alberic seizes his chance. The cardinals are summoned, and Alberic makes them an offer they cannot refuse. He forces them to swear an oath that when the next pope is elected, it will be his son. The cardinals grumble, but they know better than to defy Rome's master. And so, on December 16, 955, Octavianus is crowned as Pope John XII. Imagine the scene. The great nave of St. Peter's is filled with incense. Choirs sing in Latin, their voices echoing off marble columns. The cardinals place the triple crown on the boy's head, declaring him the successor of St. Peter. The people outside cheer, though many know this election has nothing to do with holiness and everything to do with Alberic's power. And you, standing at the edge of the crowd, can't shake the feeling that this is less a coronation than a coronation parody. A teenage noble has just become the head of Christendom. At first, John seems like a puppet, a boy controlled by his father's hand. But Albrecht dies not long after, and suddenly John is free. Free to wield the wealth of the papacy however he wishes. Free to indulge every appetite he had cultivated as a young noble, and he wastes no time. The Lateran palace changes almost overnight. You wander its halls and it no longer resembles a church. The altars are covered not in sacred relics, but in spilled wine and half-eaten meat. Women and boys flit through the corridors, their laughter echoing in the night. John's papal chambers become legendary dens of sin. Chroniclers insist he turned the Lateran into a literal brothel, where dice rattled on holy tables and hymns were drowned by drunken singing. You can almost see it. The Pope, still in his crimson robes, raising a goblet high as a courtesan, drapes herself across his throne. The saints stare down from frescoes, silent witnesses to blasphemy turned into entertainment. But John's vices go beyond lust. He is not just a boy chasing pleasure, he is a tyrant in a white robe. When a cardinal dares to rebuke him, John has the man mutilated. Others are flogged, imprisoned, their tongues cut out. Bishops are accused of treason and tortured until their bodies break. This is not the justice of God. It is the cruelty of a spoiled child with absolute power. And yet, John is not stupid. He knows the papacy is more than Rome. Beyond the crumbling city, kings and emperors fight for supremacy, and none looms larger than Otto I of Germany. Otto dreams of reviving the Roman Empire, of wearing the imperial crown in St. Peter's Basilica. John sees an opportunity. You're there in 962 when the great ceremony unfolds. The basilica glitters with candles. Roman nobles in silk robes stand beside German knights in chainmail. The air is thick with incense and tension. John steps forward, papal tiara gleaming, and lowers the golden crown onto Otto's head. Trumpets blast, the crowd roars. The Holy Roman Empire is reborn, and John XII is the Pope who made it happen. For a moment he basks in glory. He is not just a pope, he is a kingmaker. But John cannot resist the dice. No sooner has the oil dried on Otto's forehead than John begins sending secret letters. He whispers to Berengar of Ivrea, Otto's enemy. He flirts with the Byzantine Empire, hinting at alliances that would undermine the new emperor. To John, politics is another game of chance, another way to gamble with other men's lives. He believes he can cheat the emperor just as he cheats his courtiers at dice. But Otto is no cardinal to be bullied, no courtesan to be bought. He learns of John's treachery, and the German king is not amused. In 963, Otto marches back into Rome with his armies, and this time he is not here to kneel. You march with him through the city gates, past the jeering crowds, and you see it in their faces. Rome is tired. Tired of debauchery, of cruelty, of a pope who has turned the Vatican into a whorehouse. The Lateran is surrounded. John XII, true to form, does not face his enemy. He flees, slipping into the night like a thief, leaving his cardinals to face Otto's wrath. They gather in a synod, trembling, and do what no one has ever dared before. They declare the Pope deposed. For the first time in history, the Vicar of Christ is officially removed from office. In his place, they elect Leo VIII, a pope chosen not by Albrecht's family, not by bribes or threats, but by the will of the emperor. And for a moment, you think it's over. That John XII's reign of terror has ended, that Rome might finally find peace. But the dice are still rolling in the dark, and John is not finished with his game. You think it's over. You think John XII has vanished into exile, another disgraced prince turned pope lost to the shadows of history. But Rome is fickle, and the nobility even more so. Otto may have placed his man on the throne, but he is still a foreigner. His German soldiers march through the streets like conquerors, and resentment brews. The same Roman nobles who once hated John begin to whisper that perhaps the devil they know is better than the emperor they don't. And so, within months, the city rises. Otto returns north to put down rebellions in his empire, and the Romans throw open their gates to the exiled pope. John XII storms back into the Lateran, robes swirling, face flushed with triumph. Leo VIII flees for his life, leaving behind the keys of St. Peter. John sits once more on the papal throne, younger than many of the altar boys, already twice disgraced, and yet again the supreme head of the church. You can feel it as you walk into the palace on his return night. This is no longer just a brothel. It's a court of revenge. John has not forgiven those who betrayed him. Cardinals who supported Leo are dragged into the dungeons. The air below the palace fills with screams as men of God are racked, their bones stretched and snapped until they confess to crimes they never committed. Some are blinded, their eyes gouged out with hot irons. One is castrated, left to bleed on the cold stone. The young pope watches with a detached curiosity, as though he were observing a gladiator match in the Colosseum. Rome whispers again. The pope is mad, they say. And perhaps he is. Chroniclers describe John as a man possessed, gambling by day, whoring by night, and filling every moment in between with paranoia. He fears plots at every turn. He accuses bishops of treachery for the smallest slight. He curses, blasphemes, and when the mood strikes him, he takes up arms himself. Imagine it, the Vicar of Christ, riding out not to preach, not to heal, but to lead raiding parties through the Roman countryside, sword flashing, armor gleaming in the sun. He burns villages, slaughters peasants, seizes land, and calls it justice. And yet, for all his violence, John is still just a boy in many ways. A boy raised in decadence, never told no, convinced that the world exists for his pleasure. At his feasts, you see him laugh like a child, rolling dice across an altar, cursing when he loses, clapping with delight when he wins. Courtesans drape themselves across the papal throne, their laughter mixing with the chants of monks forced to sing hymns in the next hall. He does not hide his affairs, not even with noblemen's wives or with his own female relatives. He flaunts them. Rome has seen corruption before, but never with this level of shamelessness. Some say he summoned demons in the Vatican, invoking Jupiter and Venus alongside Christ. Others claim he sold church offices openly, demanding gold for bishoprics as though they were horses at auction. Whether all the stories are true hardly matters. What matters is that people believed them. The image of Pope John XII as the boy pope who turned the Lateran into a whorehouse spread across Christendom. Pilgrims arriving in Rome came expecting to kiss the fisherman's ring. Instead, they found that ring pressed against a courtesan's lips. But even debauchery grows stale, and power is a drug that demands ever stronger doses. John's paranoia worsens. He suspects conspiracies everywhere. And in truth, he is not wrong. Otto still breathes, and the emperor has not forgotten the humiliation of being betrayed by the man he crowned. Rome itself begins to sour on its wayward pope once more. The nobles whisper that John's excesses threaten not only their power, but their souls. One night you stand in a shadowed corridor as John staggers past, his face pale, his eyes darting. He mutters under his breath, curses invisible enemies, clutches a dagger in one hand. He is not the triumphant youth of his coronation, nor the smug gambler of his feasts. He is a haunted boy king in a palace of ghosts. And then suddenly, the dice stop rolling. It happens in 964. John, now around 25, is in the bed of another man's wife. Perhaps he thought himself untouchable. Perhaps he no longer cared. The husband finds him there, tangled in sheets and sweat. The chronicles say the cuckolded noble stormed into the chamber, rage burning in his eyes. You can almost hear the shouted accusations, the crash of overturned furniture, the desperate scramble as John tries to rise. The dagger slips from his hand. The husband's fists come down again and again until the Pope's skull cracks like a melon. Some say he was caught in the act and struck dead instantly. Others whisper darker stories that he was mutilated, castrated, left to die in agony. However it happened, one thing is certain. The Vicar of Christ died not in prayer, not in martyrdom, but in the bed of another man's wife, beaten to death in a storm of fury. The palace falls silent, the courtesans scatter, the cardinals whisper. Outside, Rome hardly mourns. For a city that had seen emperors fall, barbarians sack its streets, and popes rise and die in disgrace, John XII's death is only another chapter in a long chronicle of corruption. But for you, standing in the shadows of the Lateran, it feels different. It feels like watching a mask ripped away, exposing not just one man's sins, but the rot at the heart of Christendom itself. Because John XII was not an accident. He was the product of his world, the pornocracy, the century when the papacy was a toy in the hands of Roman nobles. Before John, there was Pope Sergius III, who allegedly fathered Marozia's son. Before him, there were popes raised up and cast down by powerful women, by bribes, by swords. And after him, there would be others, Benedict IX, who sold the papacy for gold, only to reclaim it again like a spoiled child clutching his toy. John was not alone. He was simply the most extreme, the most shameless, the most vivid illustration of what happens when absolute power is handed to a boy who has never been told no. The world outside Rome looked on in horror. Chroniclers in Germany and France filled their pages with disgust. How could the successor of St. Peter live like this? How could the Holy City, the heart of Christendom, be ruled by a gambler, a murderer, a fornicator? For reformers, John XII was proof that the Church had lost its way. For enemies of Rome, he was a gift, an argument that the papacy was corrupt beyond redemption. You linger in the Vatican long after his death, walking the silent corridors where his laughter once echoed. The silk cushions are gone, replaced by plain benches. The courtesans have vanished. The altars have been scrubbed clean, the marble polished, the incense burning again. On the surface, the Lateran is holy once more. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear it. The rattle of dice on stone, the screams from the dungeons, the muffled laughter behind closed doors. Ghosts do not leave so easily. And so you wonder, what does John XII's story tell us? It tells us that power without restraint is poison, no matter who wears the crown or the tiara. It tells us that holiness can be a mask draped over greed, lust, and cruelty. It tells us that history is not a march of saints, but a battlefield of sinners, some crowned with laurel wreaths, others with papal tiaras. Think about the contrast. Peter, the fisherman, crucified upside down for his faith. Gregory the Great, who fed the poor and humbled kings. And John XII, the boy who toasted the devil, who turned the Lateran into a whorehouse, who mutilated his own bishops, who betrayed the very emperor who had made him. 3 men, 3 popes, all claiming the same office. One built the church with his blood, one strengthened it with his mind, and one nearly destroyed it with his vices. But here's the most unsettling thought. John XII was not an alien. He was not a monster from another world. He was human, just as human as the saints, just as human as you. He loved wine and women, feared betrayal, reveled in power. He was a boy raised in corruption, handed the keys of the kingdom of heaven before he even knew how to shave. And when given that kind of power, he became the worst version of himself. You might want to believe that history is progress, that humanity learns, that we've left such barbarity behind. But look closer. Do we not still elevate unworthy men and then feign surprise when they abuse their power? Do we not still allow institutions to protect themselves at the expense of truth? Do we not still look away when the powerful sin, so long as the spectacle entertains us or the system benefits us? John XII's corpse lies cold, dust to dust, forgotten by most. But his story lingers, a warning written in blood and shame. The papacy survived him. Rome endured. The Church would go on to reform, to rise again in majesty and splendor. But the stain of John's reign never washed out. It lingers in the frescoed walls, in the whispers of pilgrims, in the memory of history. And as you step out of the Lateran into the Roman sun, you feel the weight of it. The eternal city shines bright in the daylight, but you know what lies in its shadows. You know that even the holiest office on earth can hide the darkest of men. And you ask yourself, was John XII the worst pope in history? Or was he simply the most honest, the one who didn't bother to hide the corruption, the cruelty, the lust that others cloaked in piety? The bells toll again, echoing across the hills. Another pope will come, and another after him. Some will be saints, some will be sinners. But tonight you can't shake the memory of the boy in crimson robes, laughing as dice rattle across an altar, as screams echo through the night, as the eternal city dances on the edge of ruin. And you realize the line between heaven and hell has never been a wall. It's a thread, frayed and fragile, stretched across centuries of power and blood. And men like John XII, they didn't just stumble over it. They cut it themselves and dragged the church into the abyss with them. The marble halls of the Vatican are silent now. But if you listen closely, if you stand alone in the dark long enough, you might still hear him. The boy pope, the gambler, the butcher, the lover, the heretic. John XII, the most evil pope in history.